Welcome back to Focus today. You know, in Oregon, doctor-prescribed suicide has been part of the landscape for some time, but that's not the way it is in every state, and there is a trend that seems to be moving across the nation. Carrie Gordon Earll is Focus on the Family's Vice President of Government and Public Policy, and she joins us today. Carrie, nice to have you with us.
Hi, Steve. Good to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Now, I imagine that these kinds of public policy issues are right up your alley. This is the kind of stuff that you're probably looking at far more in depth than the rest of us are even noticing. Are we seeing more of a trend around the nation for what we've seen here in Oregon, and that is doctor-prescribed suicide?
Well, Steve, what we're seeing is a push for it. I remember when Oregon first took this on the ballot in 1993. It went back on the ballot for a repeal in 1997, and it's been your landscape ever since. But as you said, that is not the case in the rest of the country. We have seen Washington State follow Oregon by ballot issue. California passed it last year, and Vermont. So those are the states where doctor-prescribed suicide is legal. But what we're seeing across the country, and we have for about the last couple of years, is a real push in other states. I live in Colorado. We're in our second year of fighting that here. That's happening across the nation. There is an organization based actually up the road from me in Denver, here in Colorado, called Compassion and Choices, which is a really good name. Is who doesn't want compassion and choices. It formerly was the Hemlock Society and another so-called Right to Die group that came together and has been pushing this. They are in full operation in Oregon. They are involved in the vast majority of assisted suicide deaths that take place in the state of Oregon. They were very instrumental in California as well, and that's who's pushing these bills across the country.
Seems to be the impetus now, because like you say, it happened here in Oregon a long time ago, but there's been, it seems to be somewhat of a lull that has taken place. So what's going on now?
Well, it's interesting, and I'm kind of interested in your perspective since you live in Oregon. It operates under a shroud of secrecy. You may live in Oregon and not know even this is going on in your state. It is increasing. With each year, we're seeing an increase in the number of people in the state of Oregon that go to a doctor, get a lethal prescription of pills, and take their own life. In fact, last year, I just looked at the numbers for the 2015 report. There was a 26% increase in the state of Oregon. You've seen the number of people in Oregon dying this way increase 8 times since it was legalized. So while you may not bump into it every day, it is changing the healthcare system. It is changing just the kind of the fabric of healthcare in your state. I've talked to physicians in Oregon who say, yeah, it's subtle, but it's tangible. They can tell in some of their patients are concerned, am I going to get steered toward assisted suicide? Is this going to be something that's going to be pushed on me? Now, of course, there are others that this is right smack in their worldview. And for Christians, you know, we believe that God created all of us in his image with a purpose. Not everyone adheres to that. But even for people who don't, there is a long-established legal precedent in the United States that you can say no to treatment. Any patient at any time can say no to any treatment. Nobody is keeping people alive. What we're talking about is crossing that threshold and giving doctors the authority to help a patient to commit suicide. We're very concerned about how that's impacted Oregon. We're hearing stories out of Washington as well. We know of at least 2 cases in Oregon where patients were told under your state Medicaid system it would pay for assisted suicide, but it wouldn't pay for treatment. Now, it's hard to get those stories because the people who may be involved or advocating for this don't want that to come out. But even the report out of Oregon that was just released a couple weeks ago, very sketchy details. The way your law is written in Oregon, it's the same in Washington, California. It's being pitched across the country. It's just a skeleton of information, very little demographics. There is no requirement that someone be with the patient, so we don't know if a impatient heir or a weary caregiver has helped them along. We don't know really what's happening. So there are a lot of gaping holes even in the data, and that causes us concern as we see this push across the country.
Since abortion was legalized, I think, one could look back to that to say, okay, now we've allowed doctors to have an element where they can take the life of a human. This is just another extension of that at the other end of life. I know Focus on the Family, you're obviously very concerned about this. What is the argument that you give to people about why this is a bad idea?
Well, I generally use secular arguments because, again, we're trying to reach people who may not have a faith in Jesus Christ, people who may not adhere to a sanctity of human life ethic. But one of the leading concerns that I have is this is a profit-driven healthcare system. Whether we like it or not, the healthcare system we have in the United States has a financial bottom line. And it's a simple math equation that a bottle of lethal pills is a whole lot cheaper than quality end-of-life care. So advocates for this will say, well, it's the patient's choice. But what kind of choice is it if life is expensive and death is free? Some of the leading people opposing this are from the disability rights community because they see the increases of abuse among the elderly, among persons with disability, and they know how their lives are devalued in a profit-driven healthcare system. This puts vulnerable patients at risk. Diagnoses can be wrong. The prognosis can be wrong. And what we're seeing here are people subtly or not so subtly being encouraged that this might be a better way for them to check out. That has an impact on all of the healthcare system. Steve, you and I have to live in the same healthcare system as everybody else. And when it changes the relationship between the doctor and the patient, when it moves doctors into a place that they have the power and the authority to write a prescription or decide not to write a prescription for someone, that gives them power that I'm not sure we want them to have, because I have to access that same healthcare system as everyone else.
That really goes against the basic tenets of the Hippocratic Oath, doesn't it? And that's to preserve life, which doctors are sworn to do.
It does, and that Hippocratic Oath has been around for centuries. Unfortunately, kind of the postmodern worldview, rather, is that, well, this is caring for people, and that's where you see the shift in the language. The choice of the name Compassion and Choices for the group that's pushing this is not by accident. That was really good marketing. It's like somebody who sat around and came up with the choice idea for abortion. And if you can pitch it in that garment of choice, our culture is very open to that. And it's challenging because baby boomers like myself, I mean, we've grown up with wanting, you have Coke or Pepsi. Well, this is a whole lot more serious of a choice, but we like autonomy. We like having our freedoms. When you look at the reasons in Oregon that patients ask for assisted suicide, it is not about pain. The leading reason in this last report is, one of the leading reasons rather, what people rank is they don't want to be a burden to their family, to their friends, to their physician. They rank that above being in fear of being in pain or losing control of bodily function. So this whole idea of being a burden, nobody likes that. That's not a good feeling. But you think about when you raised your children, were your little kids a burden to you? Heck, no, heavens no, they weren't at all. And you will not be a burden to those that you love. So we really, I think, have to have our thoughts in order about the value of life. The idea that death with dignity comes with an overdose of barbiturates, that means that everyone else that in my life, in my family, who has died without that, which is everyone, didn't die with dignity. So there's a real playing of the language going on here, and we need to be confronting what that is. And we talk about true dignity, true compassion is coming alongside. And palliative care, end-of-life care, has advanced so much in the last 20 to 30 years. We do not want to see an option be a bottle of pills for some. We want to have good care for them at the end of life.
I want our viewers and listeners to know we're talking with Carrie Gordon Earll with Focus on the Family. She's the Vice President of Government and Public Policy. We're talking about end-of-life issues that some states are deciding on, whether a doctor can prescribe suicide. I want to ask you something that you kind of flew by pretty quickly there, but did I understand you correctly that you said that disability rights organizations are opposed to this kind of legislation? Is that right?
That is correct. Yes. In fact, the disability rights voices are at the front lines. They are the first folks that are there. There's a group here in Colorado. It's also a national group called Not Dead Yet. And they are folks that are very wonderful to work with. They don't agree with me and Focus on the Family on any other issue hardly. But on this issue, we stand together shoulder to shoulder. And we have worked together across the country with disability rights activists because they see firsthand when they go into an emergency room, many of them have disabilities. They may use a wheelchair, they may use a ventilator, they may need attendants to help them in their lives, and they see the cost of that. So they look at assisted suicide coming down the pike, and they're very concerned about what that does to the fabric of healthcare delivery. You also have people in the disability rights community who, if they went into a doctor and said, well, I'm depressed, they would be referred to a counselor or a therapist or put on antidepressants if they wanted to kill themselves. But because they may be chronically ill in a state like Oregon, they would potentially be moved toward assisted suicide.
How many states right now, from what you can tell, are considering this kind of legislation similar to what Oregon has had for a couple decades now?
There are about 6 states where bills are active right now. Again, this is the incremental approach. We have seen it with abortion. We've seen it with the redefinition of marriage. And again, these are people with sincerely held beliefs, but they're sincerely wrong. This is not the answer. And when I talk to or hear people who are advocating for this, it really comes down to they want control in the very last moment of their life. And, you know, death is a certainty for everyone, but how we die just isn't. And when you are making a decision by supporting something like this that's going to put other people at risk, that is a factor that needs to be seriously considered. And that's why Focus on the Family, disability rights groups, and others across the country oppose this type of legislation.
Do you find that this is still a question among a lot of Christians, or are we as a group pretty unified?
I don't think you ever have a monolithic view among Christians, and that's okay. I would say greatly, Steve, people may not understand the issue. The idea of controlling how I die, and if someone is terminally ill, let them go ahead and die early. Now, interestingly enough, as a side note, in Oregon, one of the things that we're seeing, an increase in the number of people accessing assisted suicide who are more chronically ill. And these are conditions that may not be as easy to predict. But that notion, it appeals to people. But when you talk to them about the risk to the vulnerable, the disabled, the elderly, when you talk about the economic pressure of this, again, that bottle of pills is a lot cheaper than good quality end-of-life care. When you talk about the change that is happening within the healthcare system with the doctors and nurses becoming more comfortable with this, when you start to kind of tease it out, they're not quite so comfortable as they thought they might be. So it really is part of a conversation. And again, I would encourage people, have the conversation in your family, particularly about end-of-life issues. If you, even if you're in good health, do you have a durable power of attorney? Have you named someone in your family to be your healthcare advocate? Have those conversations before, not after, because the last thing you want to do is put your family in a situation where you are medically dependent, unable to communicate, and nobody knows what you want.
Is there a webpage you would suggest people go to for more information on this?
If you go to focusonthefamily.com, you can use our search engine there to look up any of these topics, physician-assisted suicide, end-of-life issues, and we have a number of resources there. All
right. Carrie Gordon Earll with Focus on the Family, Vice President of Government and Public Policy. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Steve.
Keep us up to date with this changing, because I think this is one of those undercurrent things that we may be hearing more about in the coming months and years.
Likely so. Thanks.
And join us. Stay tuned. We've got more coming up right here on Focus Today.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.